Getting up from the toilet seat for the fourth time today, I groaned, thinking to myself how stupid I was for getting sushi from a gas station. I'd really thought that I wouldn't get sick this time, but just like the other times, it got me. Every time I've ever bought sushi, I'd think my great immune system would protect me, but like every other time, it failed me again. I know that I'm really dumb for getting gas station sushi in the first place, but for some reason the sushi at the gas station always tastes so good. It was probably the mix of the risk of getting sick, and to be honest it wasn't a risk at this point. It was more of just waiting around to get hit by a bad case of vomiting or diarrhea, and the fact that the sushi was some of the best that I've ever eaten. Anyway, I got off the toilet seat, holding my stomach and telling myself never again, knowing that it was a lie, and knowing that I'd probably be on that seat again in the next 10 minutes. Then I made my way to the sink. After a few seconds, I noticed that the water wasn't going down. I rolled my eye and groaned to myself, again? This is like the third time this week. Honestly, I'd never have this problem if I just called a plumber. But my dad's a plumber, and I never learned anything from him. And even if I wanted to call my dad, my pride wouldn't let me. So I did what I always do. I made my way out of the bathroom and went to the kitchen to find the drain cleaner. Rummaging around in the cupboard under the sink to find the drain cleaner, I remembered that I had lost the cover. So I started to take my time so that I didn't knock it over by accident. Finally, I found it. And at this point, I could feel my stomach rumbling again, telling me that I needed to use the bathroom sooner than later. I got up with drain cleaner in hand when my stomach made another protest, letting me know that I better get to the bathroom right now or a clogged sink will be the least of my problems. As I speed walk to the bathroom, my stomach grumbles one more time in protest to my slow pace. I start a small sprint, but after 2 steps, I stumble over my own feet, sending me flying forward. Immediately, I reach out to catch myself. I do, and then I noticed, in my attempt to catch myself, I let the drain cleaner go. I watch in slow motion as a bottle falls to the floor, and as soon as it does, the contents of the bottle splash upwards, reaching for my face. It succeeds. I instantly recoil backwards, covering my eye with my hand, the feeling and fear of incoming diarrhea fleeing my mind, replaced by the pain of drain cleaner burning my eye. I stumbled backwards into the kitchen, screaming as the chemicals attacked my eye. I land at the sink, then I placed my head under it and turned on the faucet, running water over my afflicted eye. I stayed like that for about 20 minutes, as my tears are washed down the drain with the constant stream of running water. I eventually drive myself to the hospital, which in hindsight wasn't the best idea, seeing that I could barely see out of one eye, which still hurt by the way. I got there and got attended almost immediately, and also got a fair scolding about driving myself to the hospital, instead of calling an ambulance. The doctor told me, since I had run water over my eye, it reduced the chances of blindness greatly. After a few eye drops and some painkillers, the doctor sent me home with my own set of eye drops and an eye patch, and told me to visit him again in a few days. After a few days of eye drops in my eye and wearing an eye patch that made me look like a lost pirate, I went back to the doctor. I arrived in his office and I sat down. He was an older gentleman, obviously coming on in his years, with a receded hairline that was pronounced even more by his grey hair. After the usual pleasantries, he asked me the common questions like, "How are you feeling?" or "How's the eye doing?" I responded to his questions in the way that you should. Then he said, "Now let's take a look at that eye." After about a minute of inspection, he said, "That's odd." Then he asked, "By any chance do you have heterochromia iridis?" Not knowing what that was, I asked, "What?" "Oh, my bad," he said. "I mean, do you have 2 different colored eyes?" "No," I responded. "Well, you do now," he said. Then he held up a mirror to me, and to my surprise, my normally brown eye was grayish green. I sat there, holding the mirror, inspecting my eye for a few minutes. Then the doctor said, "This is very strange. I want you to stick around for a bit so I can inspect your eye for a few more minutes." I nodded in the positive, and the doctor moved to get more utensils. That's when I noticed something I hadn't up until now. It was a grandfather clock. It stood up against the wall. It was in stark contrast to the doctor's white office, with its dark brown wood. It had intricate carvings going down the front and the side of it, depicting what looked like people from olden times up until now. They all sported grimaces and pain looks on their face, what was kind of off-putting. And the face of the clock only had one hand, and instead of the numbers going from 1 to 12, it went all the way from 1 to 100, with the single arm sitting in between 99 and 100. But the oddest thing about it though, it had arms, not like clock arms, but like wooden arms that were carved by its sides. They were skinny and long, at its sides like a soldier standing at attention. Also, instead of resting on its base like a normal clock, it had feet, but unlike human feet that have 5 toes, it just had 3. I was gonna ask the doctor about it when he turned around with his tools and said, "Now, keep still. I need to have a nice still view of your eye so I can see what's going on. With that, the doctor got close to my eye with a utensil that I couldn't name and blocked out my view of the clock. While I sat there having the doctor inspect my eye, I decided to start up a conversation so that it wasn't more awkward than it already was, seeing that someone was staring directly into my eye. "So that's a pretty interesting clock you got there," I said. "What, that thing?" "It's just a cheap clock," he said, and gestured to a normal-looking clock on the other side of the room. Thinking that he was joking, I decided to just stay quiet, because in my attempt to make things not awkward, it felt that it was now 10 times as awkward. After a few minutes of the doctor staring into my eye, I got a feeling in the pit of my stomach that there was something terribly off. Then I heard a click. Then the sound of a clock chime went off. But instead of a normal level of sound, it was loud, like obnoxiously loud. The sound made me jump, and in kind the doctor also jumped. He looked at me annoyed and said, "Don't do that, kid. You almost made me have a heart attack." But I could barely hear him. I was too focused on the grandfather clock that was now walking across the room towards us. Startled from the sight before me, I jumped from my seat and walked backwards away from the clock. All the while the doctor looks at me like I'm insane and says, "What's wrong, kid? You look like you've seen a ghost." I raised one shaking hand and pointed it towards the clock. The doctor turned around, looking as if he's trying to find what scared me almost out of my skin. After he apparently doesn't find anything, he turns to me again and is about to start speaking. Then the clock puts its skinny wooden arm on his shoulder. The doctor starts to talk, apparently not fazed by the hand on his shoulder. Then the clock's arm reaches around to the doctor's chest and sinks it in. The doctor freezes, dropping to the ground, holding his chest that was lacking any blood while gasping for air. All the while he's looking me dead in my now multicolored eyes. Then I stare in horror as the face of the doctor appears among the legion of other carvings on the clock's body. Freaking out, I run out of the room screaming for help. A few seconds later, I return with another doctor right on my heels. I hadn't told him about the clock, fearing that he would think I was insane and wouldn't believe me. When we got into the room, the clock was nowhere in sight. The only thing that was in the room was the corpse of the old doctor. Hours later, I'm at the police station being told that the doctor had a heart attack. After telling the police what had happened, excluding the part about the clock, they still didn't want to let me go, which I think was because how nervous I was acting. But it wasn't because I was afraid of being arrested or anything like that. No. It was because of how many clocks there were. Almost every officer had a clock trailing them. And all of the clock's arms were slowly moving towards 100. They all looked very similar to the clock that was near the doctor, but they had carvings of different people. They eventually had to let me go, seeing that I obviously had nothing to do with the poor doctor's death. I made my way outside, shaken up by the amount of clocks that were in there. I was about to cross the street to go to my car, when I saw a man on the other side of the road about to cross. I froze when I saw the grandfather clock that was next to him. I couldn't see the arm of the clock and what number it was about to be on, but I knew that seeing the clock didn't bode well for the man. I was about to cross when I saw a huge semi speeding down the street. I got back on the sidewalk, then I noticed the man. He had headphones in and was looking down at his phone. As soon as he stepped his foot onto the street, the blaring sound of the grandfather clock chime went off. I shouted to him, trying to get his attention, but it was in vain. The semi-truck smashed into him, making an explosion of red mist and guts rain down from the sky. I stood there stunned, feeling my lunch about to come back up at the amount of gore in front of me, when something tumbled to my feet. It was his head, eyes wide open staring back at me, headphones still in his ears. That's when my lunch decided to vacate my body. Days later, I went to my parents' house, deciding that I needed someone to talk to. My dad opened the door, hands dirty from what looked like grease. "How you doing, son?" he said in his usual jolly manner. Then he noticed the look on my face. "I'm working in the garage, let's talk there." So that's what we did. We went into the garage and I saw that he was working on his old beat-up car. As soon as we got in, my dad made his way back to his creeper seat and slid back under his car that was hoisted up by a jack and said, "What's wrong, son? Start talking." I started to talk, but I was cut off when I saw the huge grandfather clock that was standing in the corner. Its single arm currently sat less than an inch from 100. I nervously started to explain my situation to my dad, never taking my eyes off the clock, when it moved. My ears were filled with the sound of my dad's wrench and the sound of creaking wood as the clock made its way around the car. My dad urged me to continue talking, when the clock grabbed a hold of the jack with 2 fingers and started to turn the handle slowly. Before I even realized it, I was in front of the car, grabbing my dad's legs and pulling him from under the death trap. Seconds later, my ears were filled with the sound of the car slamming to the ground. I think my dad started to thank me for saving him or something, but I wasn't focused on him. I was too focused on the clock that was now in front of me, staring down at me. It then raised its skinny arm with one finger right to my face and made a type of gesture. Then its arm raised to its own face and pushed the hand that was currently sitting at 100 back to 1. Then the clock disappeared. After explaining everything to my dad properly and telling him to just get a mechanic, I went home, sweating from my experience. Now you may be asking, why am I sharing this? Well, today I woke up with a grandfather clock at the foot of my bed and the arm sitting at 50. I tried to run away from it, but it just walked through the walls like they aren't even there. And the more I move, the faster the arm seems to go. So I've resigned myself to my fate. The arm now sits at 89, and I don't know what to do. And there's a blank space between all of the faces on its chest, and I know that that space is for me. Hello once again, and thank you for listening to my latest creepypasta. I truly do appreciate that you took the time out of your day to stop by. If you liked the story, a like and subscribe would be greatly appreciated, and it would help out my channel immensely. I want to apologize for the late upload last week, and I hope that this story made it up to you. If you want to know anything important, you can just shoot me a tweet or just leave a comment down below. My important links are in the description down below. Also, share the video with someone that you think would enjoy it. Anyway, that's it for me today. Once more, I hope that you enjoyed the video. And don't forget to come back next time for another video with a horrifying tale from a world much like your own.